Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this session with Sir Nick Clegg. He is, of course, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats and the Deputy Prime Minister during the coalition. And after losing your seat in Westminster, he headed over across the pond to Silicon Valley, spending a number of years there working for Meta. You finished working there fairly recently, and Nick Clegg is now back with a book, which is right here, How to Save the Internet. So, Nick, welcome.
Why is it without the cover?
Why is it without the cover? Because I've been doing
I see. Not for some trademark reason.
Democrat branded
Okay.
Post-it notes. Nick, what first attracted you to a multi-million-dollar job?
Well, I suppose the pithy answer, rather than the facetious one, is that 4 billion people, 4 billion human beings are using these services in one shape or form around the world. I'd sort of, actually in my time in government, I'd seen that this backlash against these big tech platforms, which was, it's been brewing for some time, for well-founded or not so well-founded reasons, was leading, in my view at that time, when I was in politics, I thought to some irrational policy outcomes. You may remember the great standoff I had with Theresa May for years about what became dubbed as the Snoopers Charter, which I sort of blocked while I was in government, which I think they shoved onto the statute book in 2016. It was all part of the Home Office's attempt to regulate technologies in ways that I don't think were or are going to work. So I became quite interested in government about the way in which these two worlds, West Coast big tech and governments, were colliding with each other, and were often colliding with each other without really speaking each other's language, not really understanding the pressures or the incentives on either side of that divide. And so obviously when, as it was then, Sheryl Sandberg reached out to me and said, do you want to, well actually when she first reached out to me and said, do you want to work for Facebook in California? I said, no, not on your Nelly, no, absolutely don't want to do that. And then had endless conversations with her and Mark Zuckerberg. And so I suppose I just became increasingly intrigued, and I remain very intrigued by this collision really between the sort of power of these tech platforms and traditional political power. Yeah.
And I'm interested that you called the book How to Save the Internet, because most people, when they look at this question, they come at it from the other angle. It's how to save our children from the internet. What made you look at it through the other end of the lens?
Well, only because lots of books are written about that. Lots of books are written sort of excoriating big tech and so on. I mean, you can go to any bookshop, you get plenty of those. That's not the purpose of the book. I chose to write the book because I think something is happening powerfully but imperceptibly, which is not being brought to the surface enough, and that is the gradual but sort of remorseless balkanization and splintering of the internet. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that, but it's a kind of boiling frog problem in the sense that it's happening all the time, often out of sight and out of mind. But the consequences of allowing the global internet, as we don't actually have a global internet. You have a Chinese internet, Russian internet, and then you have a sort of Western internet, which itself is now fragmenting into a Turkish internet, a Vietnamese internet, possibly an Indian internet, and so on. I just felt it was a subject which I had stumbled across and dealt with a lot at my time in Silicon Valley, which wasn't really being brought to the fore. And in a sense, what is driving that is the collision between two very powerful forces, the globalization of technology, the elimination of geography, and the deglobalization of politics, which is happening everywhere. The sovereigntist or take-back control politics is as strong in India as it is in Turkey, in UK as it is in France. And those two things are now colliding. And so I just thought to myself, you have to read the book to judge for yourself, that's just something which just hasn't really been examined in the detail which I think it deserves.
Well, let's talk about, I want to come on to talk to you about regulation and specifically about AI, because there's a huge amount of conversation today about the UK-US AI deal. And I do want to get your thoughts on that, but a lot of the book, you are pondering the goods and the bads of the internet, but a lot of it comes down to social media, and you talk a lot about what should be on social media. Some of the things that strike me, you don't actually seem to reach a firm conclusion. So you say terrorism content shouldn't be allowed, but you also say there are times when raising awareness of an atrocity can and should take precedence. I suppose it comes down to who in your view, should be policing the internet, social media?
That's the problem, and here's the thing, these platforms, I mean, they don't deserve sympathy. I'm not asking anyone to get out their violin and sort of feel any sympathy for them. But it's worth bearing in mind that the controversy is always around speech that lawmakers have deemed to be legal. Because illegal speech clearly shouldn't be online, offline, and so on, and if they don't remove illegal content, then sanctions should be applied. So you're talking about this vast category of content which policymakers and governments and parliaments have chosen over and over again, decade after decade, not to render illegal. And that's where and that's of course where it does become very often quite subjective. One person's hate speech can be another person's right to free expression. If you go around the world, if you're in India, the biggest controversies in India are quite rightly always about inter-ethnic violence and tension, how that plays out. This sounds like a silly example, but it's nonetheless an instructive one. When I would meet ministers and governments from Scandinavia, when I was working for Meta, they would always get very irritated that these prurient, as they saw it, rather sort of prissy American platforms didn't allow photos of their topless holidays at the Baltic because they had these sort of strict, very sort of American rules about nudity, and yet American tolerance of violence generally seems to be greater than Europe. So not only are you dealing with global platforms that are trying to apply global standards to cultural attitudes towards speech, which are actually very divergent, they're also arrogating to themselves, or people are arrogating to them, the power to draw the line between what is and what is not permitted, or what is not promoted in content that is perfectly legal. And I'm not saying that just because it's complex does not mean that they get it right, absolutely not. But I think it is sometimes, again, something which is often not appreciated. We all want to sort of yell at these platforms, why don't you do this, why don't you do that? It would actually, honestly, to your question, would be much better if governments said, okay, we're just going to make all of this illegal. I mean, I'm not sure if I'd support it if I was in Parliament still, but if there was clarity
But there is clarity. I mean, inciting violence is illegal.
Yeah.
There is clarity about what's legal.
That is illegal, exactly.
Yes.
So that's perfectly clear.
But everything, I mean, not everything else, but the things around the perimeter of that are legal. They might not be very nice, they might cause offence, but they are legal.
Correct. And that's where it gets difficult. And that's personally where I think we're in a bit of I personally think we're not in a great place now as a country, because the police now, I think, I read this relatively recently, so maybe the stats have changed, are arresting around, 30 people per day for online speech offences based on statutes, not the new Online Safety Act, but statutes which preceded AI. And if you look at some of the cases, you kind of think, really, should we be in a free society? It might be appalling language, offensive language, ghastly, but of course part of living in a free society is that you can say ghastly, offensive nonsense. Whereas at the same time, I think we're, oddly enough, not being tough enough with the big tech companies on age verification, without which you can't make sure that they build the age-appropriate experiences you want for younger kids. So I don't think we've got the balance right. And even you'll remember this, I'm sure you covered it, the online safety bill as it was. It got into trouble because it started coming up with quite new, legally opaque concepts like harmful but legal, harmful in from whose point of view. So that doesn't mean these platforms should be forgiven for their mistakes or not criticised for the immense power they have.
But it sounds like you would like government to go further. It sounds like you would like government to be more prescriptive.
I think with kids, honestly, I think that should just not be left to these platforms at all. And I just think Australia, for instance, have decided, I think in law, that that people under the age of 16 should not use social media. I personally wouldn't advocate that myself. I find the idea that a 15-year-old can't use YouTube, I think it's implausible that's going to work. But my point is, that's their sovereign right to do that. If the United Kingdom wants to outlaw smartphones in schools or whatever, then they should do so. My only point on that is a rather technical one, but a tremendously important one, which is that Ofcom has now got the invidious job of having to adjudicate on whether every single app, and remember, the average teen in America now uses over 40 apps a month. So teens don't just use TikTok or Instagram or Snap. They use them all in a highly interchangeable way. And yet what we've got is legislation in the United Kingdom which asks each and every single one of these apps to administer their own individual age verification processes, which is so confusing. Parents can't follow it. I think there's a much simpler way of doing it where you impose the same standard on everybody.
So you have argued in the book for an independent adjudicator. It's only a very small portion of your book. It's basically a paragraph, but you talk about there is a model that worked at Meta that you think could be applied across the board.
So, yeah, so one of the things I built when I was at Meta was something called an oversight board, and it's an independent board with its own sort of trust and budget and all the rest of it. And it's made up of various kind of folk, former prime ministers, editors, scholars, and so on. And they basically, it's slightly complicated how they get the cases, how it reaches them, but they basically have the right to adjudicate on those difficult edge cases is the hate speech.
So do we need one of those here?
Well, no, so I think what I was saying in the book was, it seems to me if that works for that company, why can't it just apply to all the social media platforms, or a version of it? That's what I was proposing.
And you think that that's something that could be workable here?
Well, I mean, I like to think, maybe I'm too close to it because I helped build it, but I think it's pretty good, not perfect, but it's a pretty good innovation done by Meta. No one else has done it. Honestly, I'd hoped, obviously it hasn't happened, but I hoped when I started this some years ago now, that we could try and persuade the other social media companies to kind of buy into it. And there's a version of it which is now being applied in the EU through something called the Digital Services Act, a version of it. It's a sort of a quick turnaround decision by an independent entity on content decisions. But I think it can be done. I don't think there's any technical reason you can't apply it to all the main apps.
Do you think that Ofcom should play a greater role here?
I think they play a huge role.
Does it go too far at the minute, or does it need to go further?
Well, I think I'd say two things. Firstly, certainly compared to when I was in government, I've been quite struck, and maybe just coming back to the UK after some years away, I've been very struck how sprawling the regulatory state has become in the UK. I hear from very, very senior officials who used to work for me in government, if in a different capacity many years ago, their sort of teeth-grinding frustration. They just can't get anything done.
Now
you keep hearing this. Well, I'm not sure if they work in it, but in government. And so I think Ofcom is being asked to make a lot of sort of Solomonic decisions and adjudications based on a statute, the Online Safety Act, as described before, which has a lot of untested and unresolved legal definitions. That's quite a difficult position for an unelected regulator to occupy. So I suspect this is going to evolve over time. It doesn't feel to me like a kind of stable arrangement right now.
We've crossed over already into talking about politics and the world of technology. Where are the bigger egos, Silicon Valley or Westminster?
I think they're both that's a photo finish. I think they're pretty,
Come on, that's a politician sound.
No, I mean, look, there's huge, I've worked in, I'm not sure if you found this in your career, I've worked by accident, not by design, in sort of 3 bubbles. I worked for 10 years in Brussels, first in the European Commission, and then I was an MEP, 12 years in Westminster, and 7 years in Silicon Valley. And of course, what is interesting about these 3 totally different bubbles is that they're all hopelessly self-regarding. And all industries, of course not this one, couldn't possibly be the case, tends to think that everybody else is thinking about them all the time. They think the most important place and so on. Actually, of those 3, I found the Westminster self-importance the most sort of unappetizing, just because the sort of contrast between the pomposity of Westminster and the relative decline of the importance of Westminster in the affairs of the world was quite extreme, whereas the hubris in Silicon Valley, which is demonstrably, I mean, what was that satire the other day? I saw Mountain Head. Did you see Mountain Head? I thought it got a bit silly towards the second half, but the first half, honestly, I mean, I've been in conversations exactly like that. So I'm afraid the mockery of Silicon Valley is often quite justified, and they have this, to my mind, somewhat grating habit that if you're in Silicon Valley, they believe, again, not entirely without reason, that they're inventing the future, that they are the great disruptors, that they have a sort of clear-eyed view of the future that no one else does. They break convention. And yet it's a stiflingly conventional place. I mean, the sort of herd behavior, you see it now in the sort of herd movement as they all now clamor to genuflect in front of Donald Trump and all the rest of it. It's an extraordinary herd-like behavior in a place where everyone thinks that they are exceptional individuals. So it's got its own, like everybody, like Westminster, like Brussels, has its own peculiarities.
Although less wrestling, I think, probably physical wrestling in Westminster.
Less physical wrestling.
So you have to read the book.
Yeah, well, there was a shooting gallery, wasn't there, when I was an MP?
There was a shooting gallery, yes, there was. Not there anymore.
It's kind of crazy.
You mentioned the Silicon Valley trip over here, because a lot of Silicon Valley is over here at the moment in London for the big state banquet tonight with Donald Trump. I mean, huge big AI technology deal with the UK. The question on everybody's lips, though, is what would the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have had to offer to those companies to get them to invest? What are they going to have been asking for?
Well, funny enough, Peter Mandelson got me and a few other folk together in a meeting about...
Have you spoken to him recently?
Yeah, well, and it's actually relevant to like a couple of months ago when he was wanting to try and assemble this UK-US tech deal. And I recommended that he shouldn't do it because if you look at the deal, I haven't looked at the details as they're published today, so maybe this is unfair, but a lot of it seems to me to be sort of mutton dressed as lamb. I mean, these infrastructure projects, these companies need those infrastructure resources anyway. They're building data centers all over the world. Maybe they were rushed a bit forward just to meet the timetable of this week's state visit. But, I remember saying to Peter, like, it's all one-way traffic. We should, of course, be proud of our universities like Cambridge, and we certainly should be proud of our great inventors and Nobel Prize winners like Demis Hassabis, and we have this wonderful science tradition in this country. But we're a kind of vassal state, technologically. We really are. I mean, every single person in this room, I bet you, has got a US-designed bit of hardware. That man there, I bet you he's now on a screen which is designed in the US. I bet you the software you're using is a US app. The operating system you're using is a US operating system, either iOS or Android. Your data will be stored in US infrastructure, in the Azure or AWS. And if we have any good ideas or good people, I think we're getting a lot better, and dare I say it, I think the coalition government did some great work to foster a tech startup scene, particularly in London. But the moment our tech companies start developing any scale or ambition, they have to go to California because we don't have the growth capital here, and we don't have the scaled market because we foolishly took ourselves out of the EU. The EU itself has fragmented its digital market rather than consolidated it. It always perplexes me why the British political, cultural, and media establishment doesn't worry more about the structural loss of sovereignty that all of that represents. And in a sense, this US-UK tech deal is just another version of the United Kingdom holding on to Uncle Sam's coattails. And of course we need to do a bit of that. It's the most powerful country in the world, and their technology is prevalent and so on. But actually it doesn't answer the exam question. The exam question should be, why can't we create the trillion-dollar tech company of the next future? Why can't we keep our tech entrepreneurs here in the UK or Europe? That's the thing that really, and just imagine if everything I just described to you now, from that gentleman's phone to the cloud, to the software, to this, that, and the other, was in the hands of the French. Can you imagine what the British tabloids would say in response to that? I mean, oh my God, it would be a war across La Manche instantly.
But question
for some reason, we've defanged ourselves because of our long adherence to the Cold War transatlantic relationship with the US. My simple assertion would be, as a passionate, I love America, I've spent a lot of time, I've got 2 kids living there and so on. Those days are over. It's not just Trump. This rupture across the Atlantic is for real, and it's for good. And so we have to start asking ourselves as a country, sure, how we continue to get the most out of that partnership, but actually the more pressing question is, how can we start sorting ourselves out much more ambitiously than we have so far?
And what is your perception of the Chancellor and the Prime Minister in terms of doing that job? Do you speak to them? Have you spoken to them about this?
I've spoken briefly to Keir Starmer a few months ago. I spoke to Rachel Reeves about AI and all the rest of it before.
Do you have faith in them when it comes to creating that environment here?
They seem, to my mind, a little rudderless at the moment about what is the place of Britain in the world, how do they resuscitate the kind of animal spirits which are clearly flagging in the country. For all bunch of reasons, we've been hit over and over again by real terrible body blows as a country, from 2008 to the pandemic to Brexit to all those mad stopgap governments to, and so on and so forth. Obviously now the Ukraine war, but it's left us, I think, quite out of puff, a bit sort of exhausted as a country. It's as if, it's almost culturally as if we've fallen out of love with the future, and we're always just fearful about the future. And sure, there's plenty to fear about the future, there always is, but it's really, really important that we don't talk ourselves into this sort of sullen, glum, grim view of ourselves. And that can't just be turned around by governments. It's not going to be turned around by sort of silly Boris Johnson-esque, like sort of tra-la-la-la-la, let's all whistle in the wind. But we just have to be a little bit more realistic about our predicament and a little bit firmer about what we can do ourselves, rather than what I think we're seeing in this US-UK tech deal, which is basically just taking sloppy seconds from Silicon Valley.
Do you have the confidence that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer will stand up for copyright? Because there is a question about whether America, part of this deal, American companies are asking for copyright rules to be watered down in this country.
So I'm not a great expert on this. I mean, we've obviously got a real clash here, which is that these foundation models are trained on vast amounts of data, which are then hoovered up from the internet as it is, from the public internet. It's clearly not, I don't think, feasible. I don't think anyone's asking that when those foundation models are trained, that every single bit of data out there on the internet should somehow have sort of permission should be asked for the use of that. But clearly, rights holders and creators and copyright holders have every reason to expect as well that their content should be licensed or paid for, particularly where the license provisions are clearly there. And I think what you're now starting to see, which I think goes beyond actually the government-to-government discussion, is firstly some really interesting developments in the tech space. So Cloudflare, for instance, which plays a very important back-end role in how the internet works, is basically inserting itself and saying that these crawlers that crawl for data to ingest in the training models can't do that via cloud, and they will police that and ask for payment.
Does our government get that? Are they on top of that?
I mean, look, I'm not a government spokesperson. I don't know. I think they're trying valiantly, as far as I can make out from a distance, to try and get the right balance, which is if you swing too much one way, you make it very difficult for AI models to be developed in this country, which is obviously not a good thing for the country as a whole. If you swing the other way, that clearly is very value destroying for the creative community in this country, which is so important to our economy. I think they're trying to strike a balance. I know it's always a very unsatisfactory, rather Lib Dem thing to say, but I think they are. And I actually think legal precedent in court and these, I mean, Yahoo and Reddit, I'm not sure if you saw that, I think a week or so ago, have also announced a new licensing system they're trying to impose. So I think those technological facts and some of the legal, the litigation, will actually create facts on the ground around which I hope everyone eventually can congregate.
A very political answer, and I have to ask you, I've got 1 minute, 45 seconds left. When was the last time you spoke to Peter Mandelson?
Well, I think the time...
You haven't spoken to him since?
Not since, no.
Were you surprised?
No, not remotely. What, did he... Sorry. No, you mean that he resigned?
He was sacked, yeah.
No, of course not. I mean, you saw those they were those sort of billets doux to Epstein, and of course he couldn't. No, not surprised at all. No.
I have a million more questions I'd like to ask you, but with a minute left, the only one really I can fit in is what next? What next for you?
I don't know, and of course you'll be the first to know. I'll tell you what I would like to be involved in, however insignificantly or however much, whatever way I can. It does madden me. I mean, if I take the example of when I was at Facebook, so there was one of the most senior executives in that company. I was European. The COO after Sheryl Sandberg left is European. The CMO is European. The head of data analytics is European. The head of cyber is European. The person who ran the Facebook app, a dear friend of mine, French lady, is now number 2 to Sam Altman. All these Europeans running these great big American companies. We have in places like Cambridge University, we're producing fantastic computer scientists and engineers and so on. It just this inability to scale our own talent and keep it in here. I don't have the perfect solution to that. There are clearly some inhibitions to us doing as well as we should, very high energy prices, a fragmented market. But I do think there are areas, particularly in terms of mobilizing growth capital, which I would like to get involved in.
I thought for a second there we were heading towards a second referendum, but we didn't.
That as well, yeah.
Nick Clegg, thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating speaking to you.